Hello and welcome to Foreign Policy Focus. This is episode 126 and I am the show's host, Kyle. And on the show, all I do is talk about, kind of what's going on in foreign policy and try to put it in perspective and give some analysis on it and make it understandable. So often in the mainstream media, they'll talk about a situation like Yemen and really only cover the Iranian-backed Houthis fired a missile at Riyadh from Yemen. And they don't get into any of the bad story. They never discuss or try to prove the claim that the Houthis are actually backed by Iran. They never get into the real details of the story. So when you listen to this show, I try to give you the real details, the whole bad story, so you can really understand what's going on in the world and not just get this short media soundbite where they give you half-truths and false details. One of the interesting things about foreign policy is it kind of takes so long to develop. In the United States, our presidents are in office for a relatively short period of time, 4 to 8 years. And so, during that time, we could have even several, people in very important positions like, Secretary of Defense, Secretary of State, such like this. It's been, roughly 5 years since Hillary Clinton, left Secretary of State duties and, 8 years or so since she started them. And really the, effects of her foreign policy are becoming very, very clear. 3 of the places that she really intervened were Honduras, Yemen, and Libya. In all 3 of these places, Hillary Clinton led the foreign policy charge for the United States to intervene in these countries and in certain ways. So that's kind of what I'm going to dive into on this show, get into the Honduras, Yemen, and Libya things and explain Hillary Clinton's role and how this could, kind of be traced back and blamed on her and Obama. So if this is something you'd like to share, foreignpolicyfocus.libsyn.com, thelibertarianinstitute.org, Facebook, The Libertarian Union. So Honduras is where I'll start. This is in Latin America, a place I usually don't talk about on the show. Usually I'm talking about Middle East kind of stuff. So, new to me, I had to learn a little bit about the Honduras situation. One of the best articles I've read so far is Justin Raimondo's article that I will link to on the show notes page. Li Fang co-authored an article, I forget with who in the Independent, I'll link to as well. Going back kind of to the beginning of the 20th century, the U.S. has been intervening in Honduras pretty often. I think they sent the Marines in several times during the early 20th century. Really up until the 1980s. From then, Honduras lived under, I guess, a combination of military dictatorships and different type of, weak presidential type situations. In 1980, I think they had a revolution to have some sort of president in the country and kind of kick off the complete military dictatorship, although the military remained a lot of power, had a lot of power in Honduras. Of course, the military all along, at least the ruling military, has been supported by the United States, while cronies in both countries siphon off the wealth from the people of Honduras. This leads to a situation in Honduras where the people are unnecessarily poor because their government is robbing them, and this really occurs up into the mid-2000s when a man named Rosales is elected as president. Well, Rosales is somebody who's maybe middle of the road to right wing. He institutes some policies that are a little bit more liberal and wealth sharing type, where some of the money the government is taking and stealing from the people is given back to them in the form of public education and maybe welfare payments. Rosales also looked to take some power from the military, I guess trying to put it in a civilian-led position would give the civilians of Honduras a little bit more power over the military. And of course, this is a military that has long suppressed them. It's not like these are benevolent rulers of the Honduran military. Rosales also looks to expand the number of terms the president could run for from 1 to 2. Having the president only have 1 term in office by the Honduran constitution takes a lot of power away from the Honduran presidency, as the president only has 4 years to try to get anything done. In the middle of the night, I believe in late 2008, early 2009, Rosales is swept away by the military in a helicopter and the military retakes control over Honduras. Because, in the United States today, it's a little much to have support for a, military coup and then military dictatorship, although the Obama administration was certainly okay with that in Egypt. The Obama administration had the Hondurans have a new presidential election, and a man named Hernandez won the election. That election was very corrupt. There was obvious ballot tampering, especially in areas where the U.S. candidate on Hernandez did very well. The United States validated the corrupt elections, and this is something that matters in the international arena. In a lot of these places, especially in the Americas, the United States holds enough sway to, if they're saying that, oh no, this election isn't good, then maybe the country would actually have to have a second election because of sanctions or whatever that America could put on them. Or if America doesn't get involved, I guess, at least they're staying out of it. But by validating the election, it definitely makes it good and makes any protesting somewhat irrelevant. It makes it possible for the protesters to be suppressed, and this is what happened. And even though the protesters were being oppressed, the United States trained the Honduran military. I think they trained three paramilitary forces, and those military forces are today being used to oppress protesters in Honduras. They had the most recent elections in Honduras, and it looked like a man named Salah was going to win the election. Leading up to the election, he had a modest lead in the polls, and then on election day, the election commission announced that he likely had an insurmountable lead. Hernandez, who was running for his second turn, somehow seemingly turned off the election committee for a brief period of time, and then when they returned, they said Hernandez was catching up in the election results, and then having another announcement a short time later saying that Hernandez had actually overtaken Salah and won the election. Now, this story sounds fishy. I'm sure it sounds fishy to an awful lot of Hondurans who supported Salah, and they are all out protesting right now saying, that this is a giant mess. And of course, the government once again is cracking down on the protesters. Hernandez is claiming himself the rightful president of Honduras for another term. One significant thing about Honduras is that when the United States was having the immigration crisis and we had all the children on the south border of the United States, the U.S.-Mexican border, wanting to get into the United States, many of those children weren't Mexican children, but were children from other areas of Central America, including a large number from Honduras, where the unrest after the military coup and then U.S. Hillary Clinton backed support for Hernandez led to a lot of brutal crackdowns and violence in Honduras. So again, if this does lead to chaos in Honduras, we could look at the potential for another immigration crisis on our southern border with more people attempting to flee the country as they fear suppression by their own government, whose forces are, of course, trained by the United States. I mean, when they get to the U.S. border under Trump, it may not be like under Obama. Maybe more U.S. trained forces, this time being immigration, will beat them with batons until they, turn tail and head back south or find a way to dig under or get around the border guards. And so Hillary Clinton's role in all of this was really in 2009, post-coup. She says, the coup's okay, and then she helps to facilitate the election of Hernandez and then certifies his victory. This is likely partly because a lobbyist was hired by the coup plotters, and he lobbied Hillary Clinton, and he was a good friend of Hillary Clinton on behalf of the coup plotters. And of course, the benefit to the United States, the long-standing just kind of corrupt benefits to the United States by having these ties. Moving over to the Middle East, we have Hillary Clinton's policy in Yemen. What we need to know about Yemen for this story is kind of going back to 2011, we have the Arab Spring breakout in Yemen. The longtime president of Yemen, who had long suppressed the people, Salah, was falling out of power. He was a longtime U.S. sock puppet. He allowed the U.S. to carry out drone strikes in Yemen. In exchange, he receives, kind of corrupt weapons and money from the U.S. government that he used to suppress his own people. Rather than allowing the Yemeni Arab Spring to run its natural course as Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton intervenes in the election and gets Salah to step out of power and then holds elections. Those elections only have one name on the ballot, and that is the former Vice President, Houthi. Houthi is a sock puppet of the United States and Saudi Arabia and quickly resumes the same policies and allows for the same U.S. drone warfare against Yemen as Salah had. When Salah lost the election, he went north and joined up in North Yemen with a group of people known as the Houthis. The Houthis are the political and militant arm of the Zaidi Shias, who, kind of live on the south border with Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia sees as more or less a problem because they are Shia. Previously, Salah had fought wars with the Houthis, but I guess at that time, the Houthis were willing to form an alliance with Salah because he did have the whole military that supported him. One thing that I think Westerners continue to fail to understand about the Middle East is that not everybody really understands democracy or the purpose of it. And so while Yemen had an election, the military wasn't loyal to the election. They were loyal to Houthi, or to Salah, and, went north with him. Late 2014, early 2015, war breaks out in Yemen, and the Houthis and Salah start to take ground, moving south towards the capital city of Sana'a. At this time, they petitioned the Iranians for assistance, and the Iranians rebuffed them and told them not to go after the capital city, Sana'a. But I think they did wish the Houthis, their best. They're like, yeah, good luck, guys, on that mission, but we're not helping out at all. By March of By late March 2015, Salah Houthi allied forces had taken almost all northern Yemen, pushed down at least to the city of Taiz, and were even threatening President Hadi, who had to flee the capital city of Sana'a all the way to the southern port city of Yemen, which sits on the Gulf of Aden, kind of right, there in the Red Sea area. Saudi Arabia then starts a war on behalf of Hadi and what they claim to be the legitimate government of Yemen. Unfortunately, Hadi doesn't have much of an army to speak of, and so this coalition formed by Saudi Arabia that includes the UAE, Egypt, Sudan, Bahrain, and at that time Qatar, allied themselves with Sudanese mercenaries and likely Al-Qaeda and ISIS in order to try to fight against the Houthis in Salah in North Yemen. The United States supports the Saudi-led coalition. The United States provides mid-air refueling to the Saudi planes. Without that mid-air refueling, the Saudi planes could not get to their targets in North Yemen and likely could not bomb for very long if they did. The United States also sells them bombs. Saudi Arabia has dropped countless, well, I guess not countless bombs on Yemen, but a large number of bombs on Yemen. So much, in fact, that they may have actually run out of their stockpile of bombs had the U.S. not replenished their stockpile, both under the Obama and Trump administration. Hillary Clinton's State Department approved sales, I believe, of hundreds of billions of dollars to Saudi Arabia. And of course, Trump has promised a weapon sale of hundreds of billions of dollars to Saudi Arabia. The U.S. is also providing intelligence and logistical support to Saudi Arabia for their war against the Yemeni people. Saudi Arabia is also blockading Yemen, providing food and aid to reach the starving and medical aid from the sick and dying people in Yemen. The United States is at the very least providing the diplomatic cover that Saudi needs to carry out this blockade. Without the United States and the diplomatic cover of the United Kingdom, Saudi Arabia will likely be ostracized by the international community for what they're doing to the people of Yemen. And the United States Navy may physically be helping the Saudis enforce the blockade in Yemen. It's kind of unknown how much the United States Navy is helping that blockade, just because nobody talks about it and anybody high up in the mainstream media won't ask the question. Saudi Arabia's war has been brutal for 7 reasons. The first is the blockade. Yemen imported, I believe, like 90% of the food, the majority of their food, prior to war breaking out, and was the poorest country in the Middle East. This is largely because IMF loans forced Yemenis not to grow food, but to grow coffee instead. And unfortunately, you can't eat coffee. So the Saudi blockade pretty much instantly starts starving people to death. On top of this, the people of Yemen are just very poor in general, poorest country in the Middle East, and so it's not like they have massive reserves of wealth or other ways to import and smuggle in food. If you're rich enough, these are things maybe you could facilitate. I believe the Yemen-Oman border is pretty porous. However, if nobody has money to pay the inflated cost of black market food, then it's going to be awfully difficult to get it. You also have the problem of a cholera epidemic. This cholera epidemic broke out in April of this year. This has been warned about for probably a year beforehand. They're like, hey, this is ripe for a really bad cholera epidemic in Yemen because a lot of the infrastructure dealing with water treatment had been destroyed, meaning that many people were drinking dirty water. Cholera has spread to nearly 1 million people in Yemen now, over thousands of them dying. Many of the dead can't be counted because they're not dying in hospitals. Saudi Arabia is also waging a brutal bombing campaign against the people of Yemen. They've bombed schools, hospitals, wedding parties, ambulances, funeral homes, bridges, roads, factories, water treatment facilities. I mean, you name it, it's been destroyed. I mean, they've essentially bombed Yemen back several decades or generations as far as it goes, as far as wealth and technology. There's some absolutely beautiful things in Yemen that have been destroyed by Saudi bombs. Sana'a is one of the most ancient cities in the world. And, all these relics of the ancient world are being destroyed right now because Saudi Arabia doesn't like who's in charge in Yemen and the United States, and nobody in the United States doesn't have the balls to just say no to it. So setting the stage for what's going on in Yemen a week ago is that 2017 has largely been a stalemate. There's a lot of fighting going around some of the important cities, but for the most part, nobody's gaining any ground. The Hadi government seems fairly weak. However, the mercenaries and Al-Qaeda ISIS fighters backed by Saudi Arabia are strong enough to hold on to what, territory they have left. The president of Yemen was of Yemen that Saudi Arabia claims to be legitimate President Hadi has actually been under house arrest in Riyadh at least since the rest of the Saudi princes and Hariri from Lebanon were purged and put under house arrest in Saudi Arabia as well. And so we have a situation in Yemen where the one president's under house arrest. There's a former president allied with a rebel group in the north holding a lot of territory. And there's an absolutely, terrible condition for the civilians as they're under almost a complete blockade at this point. And then fighting breaks out between the Salah and Houthi alliance. Of course, there's several soldiers still loyal to Salah, and then there's a lot of forces loyal to Hadi, the Houthis, as well as, tribal fighters who support the, kind of anti-coalition type of anti-Saudi coalition alliance. When fighting breaks out, Salah separates with the Houthis and goes to Saudi Arabia and says, hey, do you want to engage in talks and I could chase the Houthis out of the capital city? The Saudis bat the Salah plan and the two sides go to war in the capital city of Sana'a. From what I was able to read on Twitter, it sounds like this fighting was absolutely brutal and in civilian populations. There's several people in the capital city that are starving to death and just have almost no food. During the time that the fighting was going on, they were unable to leave their houses because there was constant gunfire going off in the streets, and leaving your house meant certain death, while at least staying maybe a Saudi bomb didn't hit your house. Initially, it looked like the Salah forces were going to win the fighting, but I think in probably one of the more surprising turns of events that I've witnessed observing foreign policy, the Houthi forces ended up taking out Salah, and this morning we got the announcement of his death and execution by the Houthis. The circumstances around his death are still unclear, but it does appear he was killed attempting to flee the capital city and may have been sold out by a tribal leader who he believed was allied to him. Many of his family members still living in Yemen and who were unable to escape Sana'a have been killed, including some, I believe, uncles and nephews, or not, brothers and nephews. Salah does have a son who had been under house arrest in either Saudi Arabia or the UAE, but there is some talk about him now returning to Yemen looking to gain tribal support to fight against the Houthis. A lot of people are feeling that the Houthis have relatively little chance to continue to hold the capital city of Sana'a without the support of Salah, as he was kind of, I think, the man who united maybe the Houthi coalition with some of the tribal fighters who are Sunni in and around the capital city of Sana'a. It didn't appear that maybe the tribes around the capital city of Sana'a directly aligned themselves with the Houthi, but they certainly did not support Salah, and that was something that a lot of people were surprised by. Moving forward, it'll be really interesting to see what happens here in Yemen. It looks like, I guess, Saudi Arabia will continue to wage their war against the Houthis, although it doesn't look like there is maybe a leader that the Saudi forces can rally behind, with Hadi under house arrest and a lot of Yemen, I think, mad at him for the way he's sided with Saudi Arabia during this war while Saudi Arabia has brutally bombed them, is a problem that he will continue to have to contend with. And if the tribes of Yemen didn't bat Salah, will they really back his son? I mean, those are huge outstanding questions. And of course, all of this is Hillary Clinton's fault because she's the one who orchestrated this one-man election that, circumvented the Arab Spring in Yemen, likely to maybe to protect IMF or American interests, thinking that this was a way to have the least amount of chaos possible in Yemen. However, if we look at what happened years later, we can see that this was absolutely the worst thing that could have happened, as millions of Yemeni right now are starving to death and contracting cholera and being bombed brutally by Saudi Arabia. I think the other big foreign policy move that you could contribute to Hillary Clinton is Libya. Barack Obama famously said that his decision on Libya was 51-49, which in itself is absolutely disgusting. Barack Obama went to war in Libya on a 51-49 decision, and this was an offensive war, and it was a war fought under false pretenses. Of course, at that time, the United States declared that Gaddafi was going to the city of Benghazi to slaughter every man, woman, and child in the city. However, Gaddafi was going to Benghazi to put down a Islamist rebellion forming in that city, and while that is something that probably will have led to some, humanitarian problems and killing of innocent civilians, is a far cry from the genocide the United States claimed it would be, and looking at the, what's happened in Yemen since certainly would have killed far fewer people. Hillary Clinton was the one who really pushed for the war and made it happen. The United States in this war ended up supporting fighters fighting under the black flag of Al-Qaeda and just straight up Islamist. This leads to Gaddafi being killed and executed pretty brutally, I believe being sodomized on the side of the road, then eventually executed. After this happens, the country of Yemen completely falls apart. We have, I believe, 3 competing governments, either in East or West Yemen. ISIS controls some territory in central Yemen, at one time controlling the birth city and one of the largest cities in Yemen of in Libya of Sirte. Male rape is being used as a weapon of war in Libya. Several people are trying to, I guess, rape the other side's commanding forces in order to shame them into no longer fighting. If you're a prisoner of war, just a male prisoner in Yemen, it sounds like you're likely to be raped. Refugees who escape Yemen report, 2/3 of women and children report being raped or sexually abused in their journey. People are being murdered everywhere. It's an absolute chaos and catastrophe state. I mean, it gets to the point where it's so crazy where you have a former CIA man, I guess, kind of stooge, General Haftar, who was in the Gaddafi military maybe 30 years ago and tried to do a coup d'etat for the United States and overthrow Gaddafi then, and then went and lived in Virginia 20 years, is now being backed by Russia, controlling about half of the country and having the backing of, I believe, Gaddafi's son, while on the other side of the country, the United States is trying to prop up a government and a military force, and there's a competing parliament with that parliament, so it's an absolute mess. And then also, the other thing with Libya right now, and that this is the thing people are starting to pick up on, is there's slave trade going on in Libya. As crazy as that sounds, is that people are being sold for $400 in Libya. And so that kind of wraps it up for my everything in the world that's wrong is all Hillary Clinton's speech for today. While there's several people to blame, and you could take it back to Woodrow Wilson or Barack Obama, these are decisions made by Hillary Clinton that led to huge catastrophes and thousands upon thousands, if not millions of people dying. A couple other things I wanted to touch on is we have the Flynn thing. So Flynn decides to plead guilty to lying to the FBI, I believe, not violating the Logan Act, for not telling the FBI that he contacted several different countries, all the different UN Security Council permanent member countries who could veto a vote on behalf of Jared Kushner. A lot of people assume that Kushner was acting on behalf of Trump when he told Flynn to lobby the separate countries to boycott this, or to veto this resolution that would condemn Israel for settlements built in East Jerusalem. However, one very important note is that Kushner was head of his family's charity when they were funding the building of these settlements, so it's not like Kushner doesn't have a personal interest, aside from the Donald Trump thing, as a reason to oppose this UN resolution. A lot of people like to pretend this is part of Russiagate, but it's really not. If anything, it's part of Israelgate, as we see how much influence that Israel has over this. Everybody is also highlighting pretty much just the Flynn calling the Russian ambassador about this. However, if you look at it, he called ambassadors are contacts, political contacts in several different UN Security Council member countries. And we have Pompeo, CIA Director Pompeo. I saw the tweet come out that he said that Iran is trying to become a hegemonic force in the Middle East. So that, this is kind of one of those scary things, something that, Trump would probably listen to and go, oh, really? And then now we're going to end up with war in Iran. So hopefully we don't have that happen, but good to track these kinds of things, because there was that rumor going around that Pompeo may be running for the new Secretary of State. And as much as, I don't really support Rex Tillerson, he sounds a hell of a lot better than Pompeo. Alright, that's where I'll wrap up the show today. foreignpolicyfocus.libsyn.com, thelibertarianinstitute.org, or on Facebook at The Libertarian Union. I'm on Twitter at KYAAALE. I do a daily news roundup. Awesome has all the news you need to know for the day. That could be found at thelibertarianinstitute.org or at my personal website, couchfilesblog.com. Thanks, everybody.